Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. The House Transportation Committee for March 4th, 2025 is called into session. Members, please make sure you're signed into your keypad so that we can take the roll. Glad to have some visitors with us today. I see my friend Tony Bowles with Wright Brothers Construction. I'm sure some others out here from the Road Builders Association. Glad to have you with us. We're going to have a short presentation as soon as we take care of a couple of bills on the calendar and learn about the railroads, short line, and the long lines, for lack of a better term. You're recognized? You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in all transparency, my name is Dave Wright, and I'm not associated with the honorable firm of Wright Brothers Construction.
Well, they're a good firm, and you'd be honored to be a part of it. And thanks for the transparency. Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, would you take the roll, please? It hasn't popped up on mine yet. I think it signed me out. Hold on. It's not working. But I'm obviously here, so go ahead, so we can get started.
Mr. Chairman, you have 17 present not voting. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Any personal orders from the committee? Seeing none, members, we do have a short calendar today, but before we take up the calendar, I need to do some house cleaning on the calendar. Item number 1, House Bill 1320 is rolled to the heel. Item number 2, House Bill 84 is rolled 1 week. Item number 3, HB 655, and item number 4, HB 864 is rolled 2 weeks. And item number 5, House Bill 1023 is rolled 1 week. Which brings us to item number 6. Is Representative Harris? Yes, I see he is here. He's sitting at the dais. You can present from there if you'd like to, Representative. Representative Harris, you are recognized. Have a motion and a second. And I don't see an amendment on your bill, so please explain your bill to us.
It's your driver's license.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. And House Bill 1378 is a bill that would require that on all manuals, driver manuals moving forward, and on the driver's test for new drivers, that additional questions and training and learning would be added as it relates to hand signals used by people operating bicycles to communicate turning, slowing, and stopping as our state continues to grow in bicycle lanes, and we want to make sure that people know what those turn signals mean and hand signs mean as people are maneuvering around. So that is the gist of this legislation, House Bill 1378, and I ask that the committee vote in the affirmative.
Members, you've heard the explanation for the sponsor. Any questions? Representative Chairman Todd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question I have is, I remember when I was in school and training for driving, this was standard, I believe. When did we stop doing that?
You're recognized.
Great question. It's not happening now, so I don't know why it may have changed in the past, but it's not there currently.
Follow up?
I would doubt that there was a law passed that took that out. I just wonder if we even need this law, I guess. I would think that's good information. We need to know what's on the books now. If that was part of our history, and if it's been removed, then maybe it's worth looking at. But if it hasn't, then maybe it's just a discussion with the Department of Safety. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Follow up?
I believe safety is here. I'm not sure if they are on as to testify or witness.
They are.
Oh, great.
Is that a request to go out of session? Please. We will go out of session and ask Ms. Stroker if she would come forward and speak on the bill. You're recognized.
Chair's a little stuck there. Elizabeth Stroker, Legislative Director for the Department of Safety. So Chairman Todd and Representative Harris, you are both correct. So currently there are questions regarding hand signals when it comes to usage of automobiles. There are not any questions in regards to hand signals for bicyclists. So it would just add in hand signals that bicyclists may use as well as people in an automobile.
Question for the witness? Any other questions? Chairman Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And is the same hand signals for motorcycles the same as bicycles?
You recognize.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for coming forward. We are back in session. Sponsor, you're recognized.
I don't have anything further. I just hope that everyone would support this and passing it forward.
All right. We're ready to vote on House Bill 1378. Would the clerk please open the voting board? All in favor, press your yes. If you're a no, press no. Madam Clerk, please take the vote.
Mr. Chairman, you have 21 ayes.
Ayes have it. Your bill goes to Finance
Thank you,
Committee.
committee, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the heel of the calendar, which happens to be a bill that I'm carrying, and that is House Bill 1320. We hand the gavel to Vice Chairman Ed Butler. Thank you, Chairman Butler.
Chairman Howe, you're recognized on House Bill 1320.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is a administration bill. Quick explanation. The Transportation Modernization Act was passed by the General Assembly in 2023. It proved to be a tremendous asset to TDOT when Hurricane Helene devastated much of East Tennessee. It gave TDOT the ability to use some alternative delivery tools such as CMGC, Progressive Design Build, many others. Many of the tools that were put in the TMA enable TDOT to swiftly and efficiently respond to those devastation efforts. But this was the first time the TMA had been able to use the TMA in an emerging such as that. So they've got that practical experience behind them now, so to speak. So we realize there are a few tweaks that we could make to the TMA to make it even a better tool for TDOT. So that's what this bill does. It just tweaks the TMA, and I'll go over those changes with you briefly. It allows members of the selection committee. By the way, the selection committee is the committee that takes the bids and approves the bids, and that committee is appointed by the commissioner. It allows members of the selection committee to score the bids, to communicate with each other. However, it is proven previously it was not allowed, but this will allow them to communicate with each other. We think communication's better. The collaboration would help in leveling any biases toward the purposes of the RFPs, and also allow the committee to individual score of the RFP and be compiled and totaled instead of average, which is we found is a better solution. The current statute also in the TMA does not allow emergency use of design bill, CMGC, or progressive bill, which they did use in Helene. However, it had to take an emergency order from the governor, emergency executive order number 106. This bill would change that and just put it in statute and allow the commissioner the ability to say this is an emergency where you need to use these tools that we have in our toolbox. And in essence, that's what the bill does, and I would move passage.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that explanation. Are there any questions? You good? Madam Clerk, would you open the voting board? Please cast your votes. Madam Clerk, would you announce the vote, please?
Mr. Chairman, you have 21 ayes.
Thank you. Your bill moves to calendar and rules.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Members, that brings us to the end of our calendar, but not to the end of our meeting. We have, I think you'll be very interested in this. We've never had, in my recent memory as chairman, a hearing from our railroads, which is a very important part of our infrastructure. And since we have 9 new members of this committee, I think it's important for us all to have an overview of the transportation that we have in Tennessee. So we're going to start with the long line railroads, and that's not what you call them, but I didn't know what to call them. So this would be the interstate railroads, such as Norfolk Southern and those type of railroads. And so we have someone with us today that's going to tell us all about that. And so you're recognized. Please give us your name and who you represent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Tasha Alexander, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Tennessee Railroad Association, which represents the Class 1 railroads, freight railroads that are operating in the state of Tennessee. And today we're going to provide you a 101 presentation on Class 1 railroads in the state of Tennessee. We certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Before we get started, I did want to introduce, we do have representatives from 4 of our 5 Class 1 freight railroads that are operating here. And if I could just announce their names and ask them to give you a little wave so that you'll know who to look for when you have questions at the end of this. Michael Garriga with BNSF Railway, Jane Covington, CSX Transportation, Elizabeth Kennedy Lawler, Norfolk Southern, and Antoine Hawkins with CN out of Memphis. So we'll start with kind of a national landscape. Our freight railroads operate in 49 states, representing 140,000 miles of track. Very, very significant. And I think what's also important to recognize is that on this system, about 70% of the passenger rail operates on track that is owned by Class 1 railroads. So we'll talk a little bit about passenger down the road, because that's always an area of interest for members. I think it's important to note, as you look, you can kind of see how the network aligns, and you can see a lot of connections. Particularly, Memphis is unique in its position. Memphis is considered one of 5 gateways between Eastern and Western railroads, and Memphis is second only to Chicago for rail traffic. So I thought it would also be important to provide you kind of an overview of the federal regulatory agencies. So the Federal Railroad Administration has purview over, it promotes and regulates safety throughout the nation's railroad industry. The office executes its regulatory and inspection responsibilities through a diverse staff of railroad safety experts. And then next we have the Surface Transportation Board, which is a part of the USDOT, and it was created in 1995 and is the successor agency to the Interstate Commerce Commission. The STB is an economic regulatory agency that Congress charged with resolving railroad rate and service disputes and reviewing proposed railroad mergers. It has, as I mentioned, jurisdiction over railroad rate and service issues, rail restructuring transactions, and rates and services of certain pipelines not regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We then have the FRA, and that is the Office of Railroad Safety that promotes and regulates safety among, and there are 400 safety inspectors in 8 regional offices. Then we also have the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, known as PHMSA, and they have purview over hazmat carrier registration, hazmat inspection, and incident reporting. I would also mention two other agencies, the NTSB, which is the National Transportation Safety Board. It's the investigatory agency for transportation incidents, air, truck, bus, and train. And then the National Labor Relations Board, which oversees labor negotiations. And then obviously our state partner is the Department of Transportation. A lot of times we get questions about long lines, short lines, interstate, intrastate railroads. And so I thought I would provide you some information to kind of clarify the difference between Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3 railroads. For regulatory purposes, the Surface Transportation Board categorizes rail carriers into three classes: Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3. And those classes are based on annual operating revenues. So you can see for a Class 1 carrier is any carrier earning revenue greater than 1.5 billion. And then for Class 2s, it's between 47.3 and 1.05, and then Class 3 carriers are earning revenue less than 47.3 million. And I'll let the short line folks speak to them because they're going to be talking to you next. But Class 1 railroads, we have 6. And as I mentioned, Tennessee has 5 that operate in Tennessee, so we are unique from that perspective. Those include BNSF, CN, CP, KC, which represents the merger between Canadian Pacific and Kansas City, CSX, Norfolk Southern, and UP. And they account for 70% of the freight rail mileage, while short lines, Class 2 and 3, operate about 50,000 or 30% of the national network. By the numbers, I think this is important. The average amount spent by a Class 1 railroad on maintenance is about $23 billion a year. I think it's important to remember that Class 1 railroads are privately owned, so they are responsible for their infrastructure and maintenance and rehabilitation. 39 cents of each dollar of revenue is reinvested back into its maintenance and keeping the tracks safe. Railroads privately invest billions of dollars across their 140,000-mile national networks to increase safety, improve customer service, and further drive down emissions. From 1980 to 2023, America's freight railroads spent about $810 billion on locomotives, freight cars, tracks, bridges, tunnels, and other infrastructure and equipment. So I think you can see there are significant investments made by these railroads each year. Next, we'll get down to what y'all are interested in, which is Tennessee specific. In Tennessee, Class 1 railroads operate over 2,000 miles of track, and you can see that map there that was provided by the AAR. So I think I've mentioned that Memphis is one of 5 gateway cities. In case you want to know the other ones when you're at a trivia night, New Orleans, Chicago, St. Louis, and Kansas City. So that may be a double Jeopardy question one of these days. I think that it is important to note how critical Memphis is as an intermodal hub, because it does have the presence of 5 Class 1s. And then we also have 2 major intermodal facilities in Memphis and the surrounding areas as well. So Tennessee Rail, by the numbers, freight railroad employs about 2,900 employees in the state. There are a total of 27 freight railroads, according to my numbers, 6 Class 1s and 21 short lines. I've gone over the mileage. The retirement beneficiaries, over 13,500 retirement, and then benefits of $325 million. And this was a fact that made it into the Tennessee Journal when we presented in Senate Transportation, but I think it's important to note that it would have taken 10.6 million trucks to handle the freight that moved by rail in 2022 in Tennessee. And here is a kind of a snapshot of the kind of commodities that are coming, that are both originated and terminated in the state of Tennessee. So you can see intermodal, stone, clay, chemicals, food products, in pretty much anything that you can imagine can be transported by the railroad. Oftentimes we get questions about Class 1s, short lines, trucks, and intermodals, and how they connect. And so from just a very brief is Class 1 railroads are based on long-haul, high-density freight movement, and the network demands high efficiency. Short lines and trucks represent the gathering network for Class 1, often serving one or more customers located near or each other, and they are often referred to as the first mile, last mile. And then because there are many rail customers that don't have access without the trucks or the short lines. And then intermodal is the movement of shipping containers and truck trailers by rail, and it's been the fastest growing major rail traffic segment over the past 25 years. I think it's important to note that freight railroads are a part of an integrated network of short lines, trucks, and barges. Takes all of us. And I would highlight that, you all often hear about roads in here, and we talk about those kinds of things, but freight is really, really critical to the economic diversity and stability and growth of the state of Tennessee. Train movement factors. Now we're getting into the things that are the problems. So a lot of times people may call you all because there is a train stopped. And so the first thing I want to say is, if one of our trains is stopped, that means that it is not doing what it's supposed to be doing on the network, and it's not serving the customers. And so it is never the intention of the railroad to be stopped intentionally in a place where it's not supposed to be. So we thought it was important to highlight some of the factors that can play into train movement. A lot of times folks don't realize that most of the network in the South is single tracked. So when we do talk about passenger rail, that is a factor that plays into it. When you think of the Northeast, a lot of the trackage up there is double track. So you have the ability to have bidirectional train movement. Here, when you have single track, you have to have sidings, which allow one train to pass another. So that is a factor that plays into the consideration of passenger rail and how that impacts freight rail movement. So I would highlight that. There are other obvious personnel factors, train crews and hours of service, crew call territories. There are also mechanical factors. Sometimes the train just breaks down. It could be air brakes, it could be a wayside detector stops, and factors related to PTC alerts. There are also track inspections, program track maintenance, and crossing maintenance that can impact train movement. So don't think that just because a train is stopped that it was because the railroad wanted to aggravate your constituents. It may have the unintended consequence of that, but it was not the intended consequence. I think it's also important to highlight grade crossing safety. Safety measures at grade crossings in Tennessee, like most states, are controlled by the state's DOT, as the U.S. Highway Department defines railroad crossings as public conveyances over private property. As such, the public agency determines what crossings are required at which public crossings. TDOT receives funds to do so from the federal government from what's known as Section 130 funding program, and it's administered through the Federal Highway Administration. And this webpage is a snapshot from TDOT's information that they have available. And I've highlighted some additional information from the FRA National Grade Crossing Inventory, so that if you want to go there and look for additional information, you can. Train horns and quiet zones. A lot of times constituents may call because they are mad that the train is blowing in the middle of the night as it goes through town and don't realize that railroads are required by federal rule to sound horns at all public crossings unless a quiet zone is established. Quiet zone process is through the Federal Railroad Administration, not individual railroads. An application must be made by a governmental agency rather than just a citizen or a citizen group. And then there's always supplemental safety measures that are nearly always required to be done when considering a train horn, a quiet zone for train horns. But it is something that they are required to do for safety measures. It is not just, again, to annoy the constituents. I think that another important point to highlight is that as our population has grown, development around freight rail tracks has grown as well. And so in areas where there used to be just the railroad and there wasn't anything else, you now have, in some cases, very nice housing developments, commercial. And so, those are all factors that have to be considered is because the railroad still has to provide its service in a safe manner. And so we would appreciate any efforts that you could help us with in educating the public on requirements that we have to do for safety. In addition to safety, I'd just like to mention, most folks don't realize this, but at each railroad crossing, there are signs. I've given examples here of where you can report an issue, and then we have provided information for each individual railroad for emergency notification. I would take this time to mention, and I was remiss in doing it in talking about the commodities, but obviously there's a lot of commodities that move on freight. And one issue that we are experiencing, and we have legislation this year to address, is cargo theft. It is not an issue that has abated. It has actually just continued to increase exponentially. And it is an effort through highly organized crime to rob trains. And so we have legislation to increase penalties related to that because obviously if freight rail cannot get the product to their customers, it not only has an impact on our railroads, on our trucks, on our shippers, and then also the consumers, because those costs are ultimately passed on. And so we do have a coalition of folks who are in support of that, and would really appreciate any help you could give. And then finally, we'll leave you with our last slide. This is my contact information, but then also under each railroad logo is a QR code that gives their individual facts sheet for the state of Tennessee. So you can take a look at what each of these railroads are doing specifically in the state of Tennessee and how they're impacting everything we do. If you have additional questions that I can't answer during this time, we're going to be having an afternoon coffee break for legislators and staff. So please come up and grab a cup of coffee and pose questions to the people behind me so that I don't have to answer them up here. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm done.
Thank you, Ms. Alexander. Very concise presentation. Appreciate it. And by the way, the coffee includes a barista that'll make your own special flavor, I understand. So make sure you go up there and get a good cup of caffeine so you can stay awake the rest of the day. Thank you for the presentation. There may be some questions from members for Ms. Alexander. Chairman Hawk, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Ms. Alexander, thank you very much. Hopefully I'll ask a question that it's not too difficult to answer. I heard you talk about an $800 billion investment. Is that in maintenance? And to that point, and you may have stated it, but if you could reinforce, who owns the tracks?
The railroads are privately owned companies. So Norfolk Southern would own its track, CSX would own its track and facilities, and so they are responsible for the maintenance and all of that infrastructure that's involved with those.
You're recognized.
And thank you, Chairman. If I could, and I think we'll hear our short lines coming up in a moment, is there shared agreements with all folks who are traveling on these tracks that, and I know we've worked on some legislation over the last decade that maybe address that, but tell us a little bit about how we share tracks and how that goes.
So, yes, sir. So the short of that is, and I would also highlight that Class 1 freight railroads also pay property taxes on their track and facilities. I think a lot of folks don't realize, but they do pay property taxes on that. And so that's another. And then there's the diesel tax that goes into the transportation equity, that those funds, while there is an ongoing litigation regarding that, has supported the Transportation Equity Fund, which provides support for the maintenance and infrastructure for short line railroads. And so, yes, there would be agreements, for where Class 1s maybe meet short lines, or where other Class 1s meet each other for interchanges. We get a lot of questions all the time that said, wouldn't it be great if we just had a passenger rail that went from Memphis to Mountain City? And my mother would be one of those, but we have to remember that each railroad owns its own track. They have its own operational infrastructure. They have its own network, and they have their own freight customers that they're serving. So you would have to factor all of that in. It is not a public. Yes, sir.
Follow-up?
Thank you. And to that point, I'll be like your mother. I would enjoy a train ride to Nashville if I could take my hands off the steering wheel and ride that train for, even if it took a little longer. I would love to do that. In the legislation I mentioned, I'm looking at Speaker Pro Tem's head here. Speaker Marsh had passed some legislation a few years ago dealing with that. I just want to remind folks that the history of our country, the expansion of our country, came about largely because of rail. When you look at how our westward migration occurred and the opportunity to get product from the East Coast to the middle of the country, to the western part of the country, was largely brought about by the rail system. And our friends in Shelby County have played a big role in that as we have supported migration to the rest of the country. So thank you very much. Fascinating presentation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Davis, you recognize.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do actually have in my district one of those trains that goes right behind some neighborhoods that they've had the development kind of come around. But my question is, there's two roads that are kind of perpendicular. One of them doesn't have arm bars, and it has like an egress and an ingress into a subdivision. And then the other one is more of like a 2-lane sort of larger road, but it does have the arm bars. So how does that get determined with regard to those safety bars that are in place and those coming down? What's that process?
And we'll be happy to kind of get with you and look and determine which railroad that is. I know you also have some short lines that operate in Knox, so I don't know the specifics, but typically, and I'm going to look to my friends behind me, but that determination of additional safety measures is determined when you're applying for the grade crossing safety. Is that correct? By the road authority. That's determined by the Tennessee Department of Transportation.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Vital.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this presentation. It's very educational, and I appreciate it, Ms. Alexander. Also appreciate the efforts of the railroad to better educate our communities on crossings which have been a critical issue for many growth areas. The railroad was probably there before the growth of our community or subdivisions, but it is challenging when people have to wait or we have emergency vehicles that have no alternative around them. I wanted to ask a question related to cargo theft. I hear this issue increasing in conversations with the railroad, especially around switch yards. Tell me, who is responsible for investigating that activity? How do we enforce it? How do we move forward as Tennessee to protect the goods and services that move through? Because ultimately the consumer has to pay for it, and it's rising costs. Yes, insurance is involved, but insurance is paid for by the company. So would you address that question and maybe we can expand from there? Thank you.
Yes, and if any of my railroads want to come up and so they can provide comment, but so so every railroad has railroad police that are employed by the railroad, and cargo theft has become a major issue of safety related to our railroad police. But there are collaborative efforts among state, federal, and local officials in investigating. And what we are seeing is an increase in, as I mentioned, highly organized activity that are targeting specific trains and specific commodities that can be turned over and for illegal gain. And so the freight one, the railroads, but in addition, the folks who are also supporting this, I would mention Tennessee Chamber, Greater Memphis Chamber, Tennessee Retail, Tennessee Truckers, other shippers, all are making efforts to secure and harden their infrastructure. And so they're taking on those costs to, improve lighting, gates, all of those things. So I think it's going to take a collective effort at both the state and federal level and the local level to address it, because, they are, while you may see the issues in LA and Chicago, they've come to Memphis and other places. And we just want to make Tennessee so unpalatable that they go somewhere else to rob the trains. Jane, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I think you did a great job. I just was looking, I just received an article saying that from our Federal Trade Association saying that train thefts last year or this year up 40% over the previous already. So it's an increasing issue, and you're exactly right. The solution is very multifaceted, and so our cargo theft bill won't solve the problem on its own, but it is a piece of the puzzle that we hope you all will support. It's we benchmarked with our railroads, on the West Coast who have had this issue probably more so than those of us on the East Coast. It's fairly new to us here in terms of the organized crime that we're seeing today. And they've done similar things. They've increased the penalty as, just like Tasha said, one way to make it less palatable. We want Tennessee to be a place where, they know that they can't do business. It's the only kind of not doing business that we want to have here in Tennessee is organized crime. So we appreciate it.
Follow up, Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that answer. Obviously, railroad theft must be very sophisticated. It's not like small shoplifting. You pick something up, put it in your pocket, where it involves multi-facets of crime, probably cartels.
Right.
Could you just touch on what might be the three biggest areas of theft in Tennessee off the railroad?
Areas in terms of types of cargo?
Types of cargo, correct. Thank you.
Sure. And you're exactly right. It used to be like individuals and crimes of opportunity, but now it's very much organized crime that very sophisticated, using cyber crimes and other ways of identifying what's in the containers. And they know they are targeting specific containers. They know what's in that container. They're not breaking in just to see what they get. But I would say, it's our intermodal trains that are getting broken into. So those are finished products that are en route to market. It's not like, a boxcar load of something that's used in construction or something like that. So they know, I would say tools, tennis shoes, and electronics. Would y'all agree? Flat screen TVs are a hot ticket item, without using any names. There's a very large distribution center for very popular tennis shoes in Memphis. And, they are a big target. And those, while those commodities are in our care, the railroad's care, it's our responsibility to keep them safe. And therefore, when the break-in happens, we're responsible financially for that lost item. And you're exactly right. It's driving transportation costs up, and that does ultimately get passed to the consumer.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that response. And I think all of us here are encouraged that we're making progress and making Tennessee a great place to live, but it also should be a great place and a safe place to transport goods and services. So thank you. I just want to compliment the railroad for getting that many more trucks off the highway, because we've already got thousands and thousands of trucks dealing with congestion, and the dent you're making in railroads to transport goods and services by rail is a real plus for us on our roads. So thank you. Appreciate it.
We appreciate that and just would like to say that the truckers are very much our partners as well, that we partner
I was
with them
gonna
on the last mile.
The
so.
Speaker Marks may want to address that. As a side note, I will say briefly that I did have a conversation last week with one of the major suppliers, distributors, who lives in Memphis, and he's a big operator. And he was explaining to me that he had a boxcar filled with Milwaukee tools that were stolen. And a few days later, they were showing up on the streets in Chicago. So it's not petty theft. It's organized crime.
It is.
And I'm sure the federal authorities are looking into this as well. Moving on, we have Representative Towns.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you for the presentation as well. The fascinating thing to me is that the theft in trains has been going on for over 50 or 60 years. And I don't know, I've always been amazed at how do they actually know what cargo train to go into. When I was a kid, I used to hear about it. People jumping the train, breaking in trains, And being in Memphis, as you said, has always been a great transportation area for the state,
Absolutely.
okay? And I know the company you're talking about with as well. But how is it that we cannot, with today's technology, figure out a way to scramble what it is they're finding out to prevent them from knowing what's in that particular cargo train?
I guess I would just say, I feel like law enforcement is working on that, but their tactics are just very sophisticated. I mean, it's the same way that they're breaking into other, systems, computer systems. They're able to somehow tap into, and it's not necessarily the railroad systems that they're getting into. It could be our customers, because they know when, they seem to know when the cargo's loaded at the customer facility. And then they hand off their cargo to us. So it's, they're tapping into railroad systems, to our customers' systems, to any other third party, whether it's trucking or whatever. And I think that's the $1 million question. If we could figure out exactly how they're doing it, then maybe we could put an end to it.
And I would just say, Representative, this is not an issue that is exclusive to freight rail. I think if you see the letter of support that we have garnered from stakeholders and Representative Howell, Chairman Howell referenced, it is across modes of transportation. So, all shippers, trucks, it is an issue for all of us to be tackling. And I think there is a great deal of sophistication, but I think, folks who have a mind to do something sometimes figure out how to do something, and we are lagging behind in anticipation, and that's what we're getting caught up with.
Well, unfortunately, for industry and business, that seems to be the case. The crooks seem like they're, hate to say it, but suckers are pretty smart.
They are.
I mean, that's the
are.
way it pans out to be. Our success rate of conviction or catching, are we pretty good at what are our percentage of catching those that would pilfer from a train?
Well,
if that's something we can answer.
So cargo theft can be a state issue. It can also be federal. So I don't have those statistics there, but I'd be glad to ask. But obviously, any effort that we can make to deter folks and to keep them from having the opportunity to rob, we think is a step in the right direction.
What I was thinking about is this, is that if we were able to catch some of the guys with their being so maniacally smart, we could use them on our side, make them offer, help us to see what the next.
I think
move
we
would be.
probably run into other issues, due process and things like that, but it's a good idea.
Well, we may have
Yes.
to change the laws,
Yeah,
okay?
Well, I'll leave that to you, Chairman.
To make those things happen. But here again, thanks for the presentation. And finally, what is wayside? What is wayside detection stop? What is that? I didn't technically understand that. What does that mean?
You want me to answer that?
Please.
So we have technology that is on the side of the road, that's what we call the side of the railroad, we call that the wayside.
Okay.
And there are sensors that can measure things related to the train's health, for lack of a better word, like,
Okay.
you know, the heat of the bearings in the wheels on the train can be measured as it goes by there.
Okay.
And that will help us determine if there's, you know, a hot bearing
Right.
is starting to happen. So we're looking at trends, and it's just one of the many ways that we use technology to make our operations safer.
Right. Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Alexander. It's the one next to it. Nope.
I apologize. I moved so I could see the screen. Thank you, Ms. Alexander, for your presentation and for all the work the railroads do. I, for one, have been blessed to work with Elizabeth and on a very difficult situation in my district, and she has always been extremely helpful to us. And so I would say to the members of this committee, if you have an issue, please reach out to these people. They are a wealth of knowledge and will help you work through difficult situations. I also want to say, for those people who are upset about the sound of a train coming through, I live, you know, in Jonesboro, where the train is right down in the middle of the town, and the train goes off in the middle of the night, and I hear it. But I also have been a longtime owner of a funeral home. And so in my mind, I think they've just saved someone's child. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Representative Bain.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm someone who's deeply invested in corporate accountability and industries that have endured, destructive incidents. And in no way is this a gotcha question, but I'm curious as a legislator who's deeply introspective and intentional about the work, especially when harm has been caused. I know that Norfolk Southern just settled with the Ohio community of East Palestine for $22 million regarding the train derailment. And I'm really curious about the lessons learned from that incident and how the industry is working to restore public trust after an incident like that. I know, I'm sure it caused major upheaval, and just, any remedies that you can tell Tennesseans that, you're working to revise and implement so that they can feel safe and secure. Thank you.
Elizabeth, so I can just make a general comment while Elizabeth works for Norfolk Southern, but we take every incident very seriously. And even though we're separate companies, if it happens to one, it happens to us all, is the way that we look at it. And we will find the root cause of each incident, and any changes, we are more than willing to make any kind of change that we're able to prevent something from happening again.
Yeah, this is on. Yeah, thank you for the question, and I appreciate that sometimes that's the elephant in the room that people want to hear about. I'm sure not only have you seen the news coming out of East Palestine from the original incident, but the amount of investment and time that we spend in the community in order to make the community whole again. We have a full website dedicated to all the safety measures, not only that we were already using, but that we are also ramping up in coordination with the FRA. Anything you do on one railroad as it relates to safety measures, you do on all railroads. It's not, we don't operate independently in that way, regulatorily speaking. But we continue to work forward with that community in partnership. It's like anything else that might happen of any kind of disaster, natural or otherwise. You try to do the very best you can for the majority available or willing to work with you. You're not going to make everybody 100% happy ever. But we have been engaged, we've been present, we've participated in town hall meetings, we've made investments, we've made improvements. We've done everything possible that we could do to make that community as whole as it could possibly. In fact, in a number of ways, it's even better than it previously was in some aspects. But we continue to work on our safety all of the time. If you continue to look at the statistics, All hazmat gets to its location, destination, 99.999% safe. It's still the safest way, and not to, there's 100 ways you can transport hazmat in our country. It still continues to be the highest safety metric that there is by rail.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question.
Moving on, we still have to hear from Shoreline. So Representative Glenn, I'll give you the last question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want that guy removed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for the presentation. I just got one question. You mentioned that freight and passenger travel on the same track.
Yes.
Is there like air traffic control has a tower that kind of make everybody
Yes.
move in the right direction? Is there something similar to that? I'm just curious.
Absolutely. So each railroad company has its own dispatch system. CSX has a dispatch system based out in Jacksonville, Florida. Norfolk Southern's dispatch center is in Atlanta, and they dispatch all of the freight, every train that is on that network at that time, regardless of whether it's a Norfolk Southern train or if it's an area where we're doing interchange, for example, for CSX, and a CSX train is operating on Norfolk Southern track, our dispatch center will dispatch it. So similarly fashioned with any type of passenger, if there's a passenger train, Amtrak specifically, for example, operating over Norfolk Southern line, then Norfolk Southern is dispatching that train. The only passenger service through Tennessee at this time is on our partner CN, that is the city of New Orleans, between New Orleans and Chicago. As it passes over that line from New Orleans all the way to Chicago, it is CN that is dispatching that train. Now, we coordinate directly with the Amtrak personnel. I don't know, from time to time when we have track maintenance work, for example, we'll have to stop the trains and they actually bus the connection while we're doing track infrastructure work on that line, and then return back to the train movements once the work is completed. But we will all be here. Tasha has told you, we'll all be here for the coffees and cookies. So please come
Good.
visit with
Look
us
forward.
individually if you have questions.
Look forward to that. Thank you,
Thank
ladies.
you.
It's been very informative. Thank you for educating our committee on what you do, and appreciate what you do for transportation in the state of Tennessee. We'll ask our short line representative to come forward, and we'll probably have some questions for you as well. Take a seat and we've got about 35 minutes, so we got plenty of time.
It's just the length of track. No.
If you would not mind, for the audience watching on live stream, if you would identify yourself and who you're with.
My name is JJ Hohorse. I'm the president of 3 short lines in Tennessee: the West Tennessee Railroad, the Tenken Railroad, and the South Central Tennessee Railroad.
Well, good morning, Chairman. I'm a county executive, White County Executive Denny Wayne Robinson, and I'm kind of here today as chairman of the Tennessee Short Line Alliance.
Very good.
Yeah, and I want to thank you for that opportunity. Something about people being online. I think my mother's watching, so don't let me do anything to embarrass you. But I want to talk about a little bit about the short lines. First of all, it's a vital connection between the communities that we live in, especially in my situation, rural communities, these businesses and stuff, to get them to the Class 1 rail so that they can transport the goods and services out and the raw materials in. These railroads, they're very instrumental in our local economies. They support all kinds of, not only manufacturing, but agriculture and forestry products. And what we're going to kind of do here today is not really an ask for anything, but more of an update of what's going on, how we operate, why we're at where we're at today. But the railroads currently have a great working relationship of short lines with the Tennessee Department of Transportation, TDOT. We are what our ask is that the funding that's already in place that y'all been doing through the equity fund remain in place, so that we can, knowing that funding is reoccurring to us, helps us plan our just to keep update maintenance. If we know this money is there, we can do plans, we can make track improvements as we go. Not knowing that money's there, we kind of have to just kind of hit the high spots, put Band-Aids on things, and not really move the track up to the industry standards. I would never want to speak for TDOT or nor am I authorized to do that, but we have the relationship with them is great, and it's more like a partnership. We work together, so we're asking that 20 million become reoccurring every year for us to help maintain our short lines. And as leaders of the state, me as leaders in our community, you know, we keep smart people around us. JJ here is the smart person here in this group. And so what he's going to do is he's going to kind of tell you where we're at, how we got here, kind of the history behind it, what we have been doing in the past with this $20 million so that y'all understand that the money is being taken care of very properly and being used to its best advantage. And hopefully that y'all will consider continuing that funding. JJ?
All right, I just want to say thank you again to Chairman Howell and the House Transportation Committee for inviting us here to talk about our successes to date and also make our case for continued support. The presentation from our Class 1 counterparts is fantastic and giving an overview of the entire rail network system. We certainly have an approach for all of our customers that we serve that they don't see the rail network as individual companies, whether you're a short line or a large railroad. We're all part of one network and we work well together. But as short lines, we do face some challenges that are inherent to our ability to operate and the reason we exist. And one specific difference, you saw Class 1s presented their national map, and that's certainly the perspective that they need to take. For short lines in Tennessee, this is our area of focus. And this is a railroad map that you saw earlier, but by district for you all to view. In yellow, if you can see it, those are the short lines within Tennessee. Tennessee has a long history of recognizing the value of short lines. And the model that we use today to help preserve short lines is something that other states are now trying to emulate to prevent the deterioration of their infrastructure. And they're doing that somewhat belatedly. Short lines are crucial to the successes in Tennessee's, particularly the agricultural industry that we serve, because we're predominantly in rural areas, and also the ability for Tennessee to capture on the manufacturing boom that's occurred in the state and been driven to rural areas and continued to be able to provide rail service to various communities. Currently, there's 23 short lines in Tennessee, and that makes up 28% of the entire Tennessee rail network. Historically, short lines in Tennessee have been funded, their rehabilitation efforts have been subsidized by a tax on locomotive fuel usage. As you can see by this graph, recent funding has had its lapses. There's been a number of years where that funding disappeared entirely. The pause in funding creates a huge problem in us being able to do preventative maintenance to continue to provide safe rail service that's efficient and meets the demands of current transportation needs. The last 5 years of funding that you see on the graph were from the first time that the state allocated funds directly from the state budget for rehab, short line rehab maintenance. So just some recent events to catch you all up on where we've gone in this process. In 2020, following the lapse in funding over a number of years, TDOT authorized a short line needs assessment to understand what the gap was between the current state of short line infrastructure and and what industry standards of track maintenance should be. Following that assessment, Governor Lee's administration appropriated $85 million from this Tennessee budget, which is that 5-year allocation of funding that occurred. In 2022, TDOT applied for and was awarded a federal grant to help to provide a large amount of funding to replace 42 bridges across the state. So that was a huge win, and we want to make sure to highlight that. 2024, we added an economic benefit study to measure the value that short line service has for the communities we serve in comparison to the funding that's been provided. And now we're at 2025, where when we hit our fiscal year 2026 will be the end of the current allocated funding, with an uncertain future for if this funding will be available going forward. The Transportation Equity Fund that provides the funding for short line rehab we view it as having two objectives. The first is a need to replace infrastructure that's past its useful life, bridges, rail, and ties that were not intended to be in service as long as we've been able to keep them in service. But the funding the funding is help achieve those replacements and also get to a higher the current thing that industries require. The secondary objective of the funding is to support the ongoing maintenance for areas that are considered revenue deficient but economically valuable, meaning areas that maybe the rail traffic doesn't equate to the importance of the jobs that are created from the facilities we serve. This secondary objective really strikes at the heart of why short lines exist. Short lines exist because of the disparity between a private enterprise's ability to bear cost versus the public good that service provides. And that disparity is where we've asked the state to help support. I want to go back to that needs study in 2021 that was created. And it viewed all 817 miles of short line track in the state and determined that 41% of that network had a weight restriction to it, meaning that shippers could not load their cars at what maximum allowable weights would be. And 31% is considered accepted track, which is the Federal Railroad Administration's lowest level of track standard. These are the type of limitations that not only affect current shippers, but also impair the ability for those communities to attract prospects for industrial development. When advertising a greenfield site, they're unable to say that the railroad is reaching industry standard. So this total need is what we're looking to address and tackle. So I just want to share an update on the progress we've made given the funding that was made available to us. So far, $80 million has been allocated, and about 77% of that is put towards completed projects or in progress projects. So we're moving very quickly on the funding that's been provided. On the original assessment of needs, out of the 89 bridges that were rated poor, 28 have been replaced. We've added 90,000 ties from these projects, and 16 miles so far of rail undersized rail has been replaced. The emphasis on bridges is important because the way we view it is if a piece of rail fails, it's not that difficult to replace. When a bridge fails, it's really detrimental to service in the area. So we're focusing on bridges, and we're hoping the next phases will then focus on the rail. Chairman Howell, you might be able to attest to the fact because I think you're a recipient of a piece of undersized rail that we've picked up.
It's in my office, yes.
I think you can attest to the fact that it's better used as a paperweight these days than actual infrastructure in Tennessee. This is an example of the type of work that we're doing on the bridges. On the left side, you'll see a timber bridge that probably was put in early 1900s. And just last year, we replaced that with a steel bridge that hopefully will outlast all of us here. And to see some of these timber bridges, while I can guarantee you, as long as we're running across them, are safe, regularly monitored, and we're doing all the preventative maintenance we can to extend their useful life until they can be replaced, I'd question if you're interested in walking across it yourself. Some additional highlights of successes we've had thanks to the support of this funding and the partnership with TDOT has been our ability to attract federal funds to supplement these projects. I mentioned TDOT was successful in their application for a bridge replacement project that's added $23 million in funding. And we had about 3 others awards through the DOT CRISI funding that is going to allow for 38 miles of track to be replaced and nearly 53,000 ties. In total, $55 million worth of funding we were able to target because we were able to use the transportation equity funds to supplement our ask. Quickly wanted to just talk about what the situation is if funding ends. At first, we'll continue to face limitations in communities due to the limitations on the weight of a rail car and the carrying speeds and inefficiencies of transportation. It'll affect shippers and it will continue to affect industrial development prospects. Eventually, railroads, short lines will have to try to increase prices for shippers, and that will affect the end consumers and affect their competitiveness in the market. When they can no longer take on that additional shipping costs, that freight movement gets converted to trucks, which has impacts on local, county, and state roads. And eventually we'll be faced with the same decisions we were faced with in the 1980s, which is if it's no longer viable to support these railroads, then some of them will be forced with the decision of facing abandonment, and those communities might lose their rail access. So as Denny Wayne Robinson mentioned, we've come really with the need to continue our efforts on this funding to ensure that the goal of getting Tennessee's infrastructure on short lines reaches the industry standard that shippers expect today. And we've asked for annual funding of $20 million per year, which accomplishes the needed upgrades within a reasonable time frame, addresses and allows for consistent capital project planning. Additionally, anytime that federal funds are able to supplement this is something that we greatly appreciate TDOT's effort in trying to target. And we thank the committee for allowing us to speak today and welcome any questions.
JJ. Thank you. It goes without saying, members, that short line railroads play a very important part in the infrastructure and supply chain of the state of Tennessee. If you have any questions for our witnesses while they're here.
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to emphasize, we're not asking for additional funding. Just keep it as, and if your support with TDOT, maybe contact Commissioner Ely or your contact for TDOT and just let them know that you support them continuing the funding.
And members, you may recall we had a hearing with the airports recently. They are recipients of DEF funds, state funds as well, because they play a vital role in the economy. I would draw a parallel with the airports as well as with our short line railroads. Very important to our economy. When you're impacting the economy with an annual $544 billion each year, it's important to invest in. And I think we hear you. Representative Towns, you have a question?
Simple. Why is it called short line? What's the difference in that?
Short lines are a product of abandonment in the 1980s because of the revenue deficiencies along essentially branches off of the Class 1 railroads. So predominantly serving rural communities where so we don't have as many miles of track typically. But we like to say track is just as wide.
Right. Okay, very good. Thank you.
I have some of you probably have short lines in your district. I think, was it 55 house districts you serve? 50? There's one in my district, and they take on different faces. My short line railroad is actually a historic train ride and takes tourists all over the area of the Smoky Mountains, and I've ridden it 2 or 3 times, and it's a lot of fun. You see some beautiful scenery, goes by the Hiawassee River, and that serves a purpose as well. It's generating tourism. It creates economic taxes into that county, so they all serve a purpose. Any other questions for our witnesses? Representative Mayberry.
Before I ask the question, I do want to say that myself and Representative Glenn live off of the last train to Clarksville. So, I do want to make that public announcement. But the question I have for you is your short lines are also independently owned or publicly owned?
All independently owned.
All independently owned. Okay.
Ours is owned by the governments in the tri-county, 3 counties of the governments.
Okay. So some are public, some are independent.
Yeah, the authority.
Yeah, so a little more than class 1, sorry, to be a little more specific. When you talk about ownership, it's a bit of a, there's variances in who actually owns the infrastructure of the track. A lot of the initial setup that started in the 1980s to create this public-private partnership was the communities actually having ownership of the track right-of-way itself with an agreement with an operator. And so a lot of the trackage short lines operate on actually exists with that, because that enables the local community to have a say in maintaining the railroad.
Thank you.
Representative Mayberry, I think Chairman Hawk and I are the only ones that got the reference to the last train to Clarksville. That was an old song, but it was a good one. Any other questions for our guests? Seeing none, thank you for being with us today. Very informative, and you contribute a lot to Tennessee and our economy and our transportation and infrastructure needs. We appreciate you. Thank you for being here.
We appreciate it.
today.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. That ends our session for today. Do I hear a motion? We are adjourned.